everyone. It's Naomi Wolf of Daily Cloud, and I'm really honored and excited to be here with Reinette Senum, who is running for governor of the state of California. Welcome, Ms. Senum.
Thank you, Naomi. It's a great pleasure to be here. Thank you.
I'm thrilled to be talking to you. We've spoken once before, as Daily Cloud viewers will know, when you shared with me your vision for running for governor of the great state of California, my home state, when we were both at the LA Defeat the Mandates rally. I was so struck by how comprehensive your vision was that I'm thrilled that we get a chance today to go into more detail about your 23-page white paper, which people can see on electreinette.com, which really describes much more fully than most candidates I've seen concretely what your vision is. So before we get into the details, just tell us who you are and why you're running.
Well, I'm from a small Northern California town called Nevada City, California, up in the Sierra foothills. And I was raised in this county since I was about 4 years old, adopted when I was 2 months old, hardworking Teamster truck driver, father, registered nurse, mother. And then I spent my early years traveling around the world, about 60 countries, always $10 a day. My adoptive mother did die when I was 19 years old, which had a big impact on me. And then I got into real extreme expeditions, training for a South Pole expedition, organizing an American Women's Trans-Antarctic expedition. And then ultimately I ended up spending time commercial fishing in Alaska and the Gulf. And I ultimately took a camera from National Geographic and filmed myself crossing Alaska in the dead of winter. And interestingly enough, we all have to get that out of our system, just get out of the system. So interestingly enough, here I was out in the middle of nowhere, but interesting, I actually learned about the power of community along the way. And I got some really incredible insights into how our humanity works and how we're inspired and how we're motivated. And then I ended up going down to Los Angeles for 8 years studying filmmaking, because when I filmed for National Geographic, I fell in love with it. But so I was there for 8 years, and I came back in 2004 to my hometown, Nevada City. And at that point in time, Bush was reelected for a second term. And I remember thinking, oh man, we're in such trouble. And of course, now that looks like the good old days.
Right.
So, but I was looking at the world, and then I got kind of caught up into our oil consumption in America and our addiction and what was called at the time peak oil. And ultimately what I ended up doing was I held the first peak oil conference in 2005. And out of that came a think tank. And out of that came an organization I co-founded with community members called APPLE, Alliance for a Post-Petroleum Local Economy. And basically what we were doing is just really massive outreach to the community to teach them how to be more resilient locally and regionally, especially around the food network and so on. So at that point in time, I was very involved in this type of resiliency movement. I was going to our city council meetings a lot, and I found that they were actually more reactive than proactive. Mm-hmm. And by the time I crossed Alaska, I had experienced a real personal legacy story that had a huge impact on me around legacy and what we leave behind. And I started asking the questions: what are we leaving behind? Where are we going? What's our goal? What's our collective goal? And so in 2008, I decided to run for city council. I got elected, became a vice mayor and the mayor, created a sustainability team, handpicked people in my community to create a 20-year city sanctioned vision, sustainable vision for Nevada City. And then what I tried to do was just really model the changes I wanted to see in the world. I couldn't control what was going on in the world. I couldn't change the world, but I can make a better community. And my hope at that time, Naomi, was simply just to have people come into the town and go, oh, this is what a community is. Oh, this is what a sense of place is like. And so myself and community members and farmers started the first organic farmers market in the county. And then we also made sure that we had the municipally owned buildings with solar power. We actually did a massive green energy efficient retrofit in a city owned building to show how to model, good energy conservation and building. And then we started the first extreme weather shelter for the homeless, started a homeless advocacy organization for the homeless, and started a time bank, which basically exchanges kindness.
Oh my God.
Yeah. You do not know that kindness can actually be an asset-backed currency. And so again, the objective was just to create the reality I wanted to in my own community. And after 4 years, I thought I was done. And I was still highly engaged. I was still averaging about 2,000 hours a year in volunteer work. And on the city council as mayor and city council member, we do not get paid. It was still all volunteer.
Sure.
And I thought I was done, and then what happened was I was watching the city council, not really thrilled with their leadership, but what was really concerning me was I was starting to see this uptick in outside interference. And in fact, the Trans-Pacific Partnership was coming on, right? And I was watching that, and I was trying to tell people, like, look at you guys, if this thing passes or any kind of iteration that's similar to it, we're going to have problem with worker rights, minimum wage, environmental protection, worker protection, all these different things.
Right.
And then we also had more corporate encroachment as well, right? Our what was known as our sphere of influence was being threatened more. And I thought, I think I'm going to get back on the council. Not that I want to do this, but I am.
Yes.
And I just want someone to have a backbone. And as soon as I got on, within months, Paradise happened. Where the whole town burned down. That's just, I know, a few miles from us. And at the same time, and by that time, the world had changed. So we had these incoming threats. We had that. Then we had policy, homeowner insurance cancellations. People could not afford their insurance. They could not afford their homes. They could not afford their rent. Then Pacific Gas and Electric was taking down our power for days at a time, and some businesses shuttered and never reopened their doors again. The homeless population was rising, and just, a rise in unfunded liabilities within the city itself, and just the cost of living and so on. And then, of course, I'm mayor and COVID hits. And when COVID hit, it got on my radar in January. I don't know why, but it did. And I started getting Twitter and Facebook accounts in China to see what's going on. I was really distraught over the Chinese government's reaction to it. And when I went to the counties and cities and said, hey guys, there's a thing called coronavirus. And if it's as virulent as they say it is, we should really be on our game because it's right over there. Right. And it could be circulating and we don't know it. And so finally I signed a declaration of emergency as mayor in early March. Then, of course, Newsom did his stay-at-home orders. At that point in time, I was supportive of it because we had nothing more than models.
Right.
And as mayor, I'm like, I just have to, I'm a risk taker, but right now I have to be uber conservative. And then what happened was you had the 2-week stay-at-home orders, even the mask at that time. I'm like, I support it because, again, we don't know. And then at that point in time, all of our public meetings are now put onto Zoom, online. We're having regular Friday meetings with the public health directors, the county heads, the CEO of the county, the city managers and mayors, to make sure we're all on target, on message, on the same page, same information. And I was supportive of that until we would get the real data in. And at that point in time, I'm okay, this is good. And then the real data came in.
Right.
And it wasn't as bad as we thought.
Oh my God.
It wasn't as virulent as we thought, right? I mean, I was watching the Johns Hopkins University updates every day, and they're saying it was going to double every 5 to 6.4 days. And that, according to my calculation, meant by the end of April, we were going to be completely consumed around the planet by this virus. Did not happen. Fantastic. So I started saying, hey, so maybe what we should do is, start asking ourselves exactly what's the goal? What's the metrics here? What are we shooting for? And on these Zoom calls, where there's like 35, 40 people on them, I would either be muted, I would be ignored, or I'd be told, Reinette, you're asking too many questions, which was more than 2 questions. Wait till the meeting's over, and then we'll answer your blades in the grass questions. And they kind of pile.
I've got to jump in here because you're confirming from your vantage point as a duly elected city leader, something that I've seen and heard about in communities across the country, which is outsiders coming in under the guise of public health and muting or walking away from or somehow breaking the social contract with the elected officials and leaders of the city. So tell me, who told you on these calls, you're asking too many questions, who muted you?
That would be my CEO of the county, the CEO of the county.
Whoa.
Allison Lehman, and she was the one chairing these meetings. And then I did have one doctor who is now a former friend. I've lost a great deal of respect. When I finally got an answer, he said to me, when I was saying, what's the goal here? His answer was, Reinette, until we have 0 cases. And I said, when do we ever have 0 cases of anything? That's just unrealistic. And then I was told by another doctor right afterwards, he said, well, Reinette, Nevada County has a very low herd immunity, AKA that meant vaccination rate. We had the lowest vaccination rate at the time in the state, if not the nation. And I said, well, if you're talking about herd immunity, you must be talking about acquired herd immunity. So at this point in time, we should let people back outdoors, fresh air, sunshine, vitamin D. And if anything, we should be sending out vitamin A, vitamin B, vitamin C tablets, zinc tablets, and teach people how to grow their own food, get their hands in the soil, right? That's really healthy. Actually have them boost their herd immunity and eat healthy, right? Food is medicine. They wanted nothing of it.
Every single thing you said is scientifically correct.
And I knew, I was doing my research. I knew, and it wasn't rocket science. Well, at the time, two, what I had come across at that point in time, and I became very concerned with, is in the state of California in 2019, legislation was passed, which was really not noticed very much, that gave unilateral authority to every single public health director in every county in California. They were given the authority through this legislation to close down businesses, close down schools, send people home, stay-at-home orders. And it's like, wow, I have never known one individual who's never been elected nor appointed, but hired by the county staff to have that kind of power over everything.
Mm.
And that was a setup at the net, essentially is what I saw. That was a setup at the net. Why would they even do that unless somebody intended on using that type of power? So at this point in time, I was going around with different county and city officials, and I began asking these questions. And then comes June, and I've just been reelected for a third term. And we now have Newsom giving his statewide mask mandate. And I thought,
and this is June of 2020. Okay.
And I'm thinking to myself, well, that's amazing. I didn't know governor had that kind of unilateral power to do something like this. So I walked right down to our city hall. I talked to our police chief, Chad. I said, Chad, do you intend on enforcing this mask mandate? And he said, I don't know how. It doesn't come with a penal code. Can't enforce something without a penal code. And it doesn't look very constitutional. I said, thank you very much. That's what I thought.
There's no penal code.
Mm-mm.
My head is exploding. You're the first person to have raised that important question with the enforcers. There's no penal code. There's no penalty. There's no offense.
No.
It's a meaningless mandate.
Right. And a mandate is not a law.
A mandate is not a law. Go ahead. I'm listening. This is fascinating.
So then at that point in time, I'm looking out across the whole entire environment of California, and I'm looking for the leaders. I'm looking for the backlash. I'm looking for people to speak up saying this is not how laws or rules are made. This is not within the purview of the governor. And this is a slippery, dangerous slope.
Right.
And instead of hearing that, I heard nothing. So I thought, okay, so I'm going to, once again, which I have done in the past, I'm going to resort to my Facebook page. And I got a Peggy Hall, the Healthy American video, where she describes how legislation is made, beautifully done. And I put out a very bold post that basically said, regarding this mask mandate, as you go about your day, know that Newsom does not have the unilateral power or the authority, keep breathing, whatever. and of course, all hell broke out. All hell broke out. You know, LA Times, Sacramento Bee, SF Gate, we're all saying the same thing, which was, mayor says masks don't work. And I was like, no, that is not what I'm talking about. I'm not talking about the efficacy. I'm talking about the authority of the governor. And so at that point in time, I had just won my third election. So I was going to be on the city council for 4 more years. I was very distressed by what I was seeing behind the scenes. I could tell that it was as much as what they weren't saying as what they were saying regarding, it looked to me at that point in time, in the late spring of 2020, that the objective was to get people vaccinated.
Right. Already you could tell.
Yes.
Wow.
And so I'm talking to my partner, Susan, of 14 years, where that time was just about 12 years. And she started saying, she goes, do you think that you can be on the council for another 4 years with what you're experiencing? And I said to her, I said, I don't think I'm going to be able to shut up. Yeah. And when I had already called out the Newsom's mask mandate, at that point in time, all hell broke out, and people in my community are like, well, we love Reinette, we hate her, we love her, we hate her, back and forth. And my poor city hall staff, it's very small, right? Tiny town. All they're doing is answering emails and phone calls. They can't get to work. And I thought, this is never going to end because I'm not going to shut up. So now it's July of 2020. I'm ready to step down as mayor, take my oath as city council. And on our Zoom calls, I'm sharing this. Instead of getting ready for the oath, I actually said, I'm resigning. And I read my resignation letter. And when I did that, by that time I had already learned, because I had been very much in the fight against really bad 5G legislation in the state of California. I was familiar with a lot of incredible environmental advocates around the world. And one such advocate was Dr. Leonard Hardell, who had convinced the World Health Organization many decades ago that Agent Orange was a cancer-causing agent.
Wow.
And once he did that, he went around to the heads of the chemical companies and said, stop spraying. If you don't, you're committing crimes against humanity. And when they didn't stop spraying, they dragged them into the international courts, and they only had to ask one question and one question only to determine whether or not a person was committing a crime against humanity. And that question was, What did you know by when?
Hmm.
So I said to my city council, you have the information I have. You should know
Hmm.
as much as I know. And you have the ability to adjust, and you're not. So I want to let you know I'm stepping down to step up. I'm resigning. I'm going to come back. We're going to hold your feet to the fire to the highest extent of the law because you're all committing crimes against humanity. And I resigned. And at that point in time, I thought that I would just do very much what you do as far as like going out there and interviewing people, experts in the respective fields, because I was by then already talking with and connecting with medical practitioners and doctors who are having successful treatments and therapies around coronavirus. And I kept saying, you guys, you don't have to be so afraid. We're actually better off than you think. It's not as bad as you think. But at that point in time, the public health department was utilizing what is called fear appeal. It's an old field of study around what you do is you find what it is that's a risk to yourself and your loved ones, and you keep amplifying that message over and over and over again until the person is in such anxiety, they'll capitulate and do whatever you ask just to relieve that stress and that pressure. And that was on steroids, and I was watching it. So at this point in time, my objective was to simply just educate the public. And I was interviewing different experts in their fields, whether they're legal, doctors, virologists, epidemiologists, scientists. And what most people don't know is they're elected officials. It is their job to keep their constituents informed. That is the duty of elected officials. And that's the exact opposite of what had been happening. And so I began to do these interviews. I was on Del Bigtree's The High Wire for stepping off the council. And then I had people around the state saying you should run for governor. And really my response was absolutely not. It is never going to happen. And in fact, my partner and I were actually test driving RVs, and I'm like, I'm just going to go keep doing my interviews. We're going to jump in an RV, travel around the United States. And then I started to imagine myself watching California behind us burn. And I just thought, I don't have the capacity to do this. I will crawl out of my skin. I can't just walk away. So I had a couple people ask me to run. I had a lot of people, but two in particular. And then I kept waiting, Naomi. I kept waiting for the doctors and the nurses. And this was the summer of 2020 into the fall. And I was waiting for the elected officials to start really speaking up and pushing against this. And it didn't happen. I wasn't seeing it. And I just thought, yeah. So I started talking to my partner because she said, you're not making this decision without me. And she says, do you really want to do this? And I said, well, I don't think want is the operative word. I said, I think I'm on a mission because I can't imagine. I said, well, basically, I don't trust anyone as much as I trust myself. And at this point in time, there's no one I see standing up that I'm like, I can get behind you. I'll back up your campaign if you want to run for governor or anything like that. So what happened when I was speaking to those wanting me to run, I ultimately said, look, if I'm going to do this, you've got plenty of candidates out there to just do more of the same. If you want to do something extraordinary, if you want to do something that's never been done before, I'm willing to jump in and I will give everything I've got. But there's two requisites. The first is it has to be no party affiliation, because ever since 2010, Citizens United versus FEC, which basically gave corporations the power to use their campaign donations as, First Amendment speech and invest in, election campaigns left and right. They've completely infiltrated the Democrat, Republican parties. Representative government is basically dead ever since then. So I cannot represent a party and represent the people on the planet simultaneously. So that in itself is a Herculean lift and comes with its own challenges, but the timing has never been better for this. The next thing I said is, as an activist and somebody who's been in the trenches for almost 20 years, and I'm watching everything backslide, I realized that, we have this beautiful Constitution. And it was inspired by our forefathers. And most people don't realize the level of involvement of this Constitution. It was inspired by our forefathers from the Six Nations of the Iroquois Confederacy, right? So they were actually, Benjamin Franklin spent like 7 years with the Iroquois learning about you're going to love this. It's called the Great Law of Peace.
Wow.
Law of Peace right here is column by column, section by section, the Great Law of Peace compared to the US Constitution.
That gives me chills. What a heritage for our country. Wow. That's been erased from history or from tradition.
And I'm all against historical revisionism. I've lived through it. I've had it happen to me. I've seen it happen. That's what we're experiencing right now. So we've been told a story that, and I was led to believe this too for quite some time, that the white men, our forefathers, went in there and basically stole this idea, this concept, this framework for a constitution. But no, Ben Franklin actually spent 7 years with the Iroquois. And there's even this wonderful little image here with Iroquois, and here's, Ben Franklin humbly sitting there before them, and they drew it out, and they teamed up. But what was interesting is that they had this incredible vessel called the Constitution, but every vessel should have an anchor and a compass. The compass, which is the foundation of my campaign, is the 7th generation principle. That is basically just every decision we make today should serve 7 generations from now. And I have learned from personal experience that we have no metrics for our leadership. There's no measurement. And the anchor wise are the elders, and particularly the women, right? The elder council, the female. And the Iroquois said, you've messed up. You forgot the women. You forgot the elders. And we should actually be drawing them into the decision-making. They look back the last few generations to ensure for the next 7 generations. And that was the fatal flaw of the Constitution, was not including the women, the elders.
Yeah, and the elders. Fascinating. So you're running as an independent.
A declined estate is actually, there is an American Independent Party.
Right. Okay. And so practically, what do people need to do immediately to support you? You have a primary coming up, right? So we're kind of under the gun here in terms of people getting to know about Reinette Senum and supporting you. Do you want to tell me what your timeline is, and then we'll talk about
well, first of all, the media is almost silent in the fact there's a primary, and ballots are going out in about 3 weeks. At 3 weeks out from the recall last year, all you heard and saw above the fold was recall, recall, recall. Now there's a complete silence around it. Most people have no idea there's even a primary coming up. 26 candidates. This is our opportunity to remove Newsom for the next 4 years. And so we have 3 weeks. And basically, while it is a challenge to be a declined estate, not this year. We have been on the campaign trail for months and months and months. There's 3 things that we are drawing from these campaign trail stops. First, people are saying we just want Newsom out. We're done with him. And that's left and right, both sides.
Really?
Want him out.
What reasons do they give, Reinette, Ms. Senum? What reasons do they give for wanting him out?
Rise in crime, rise in homelessness, loss of bodily autonomy, the shuttering and destruction of mom and pop businesses, the massive exodus that everyone right now is just trying to stop themselves from having to leave the state. They're holding their breath around this election. And just the crushing cost of living, price of gas, and of course the taxes, the unfettered taxes, which are absolutely out of control. It's a great way to destroy a state from the inside out. And I ask people all the time, are you better off now than you were 4 years ago? I've not heard one person say yes.
I must say, they're not partisan answers. These are not wedge issues. These are issues you can't slot in a box of left or right. Go ahead, please.
Correct. So what we're finding, which is a rule of thumb, is that 80% of people agree with 90% of the issues. And we're finding that.
Oh.
And so what people don't understand when it comes to a primary, there's a bad setup that happens that sets us up for failure come the general election. So what we know is that we have this primary election. People don't even know about it. They're quite surprised, to be honest, because we just had a recall. And so what they don't realize is generally when it comes to a primary, the people who vote in primaries are the extreme left and the extreme right.
Interesting.
So what they do is and in California, it's an open election, an open ballot where you can vote and get the top vote, two vote getters. So it doesn't matter if it's 2 Republicans or declined estate and 2 Democrats, does not matter. Party affiliation does not matter. 2 top vote getters. But what happens is you have the extreme right and the extreme left, who are the ones who vote. They pick the top 2 vote getters. Comes the general election now, where there's basically a runoff in November. And guess what? It's the people in the middle who are the people.
Oh my gosh.
Who elect the 2 extremes of either side. And that happens over and over and over again.
Right. Oh my gosh. That makes such sense. Looking back over history, that's exactly what happens. Wow.
It's a setup for extreme representation or lack of representation, big money infiltration, and no representation for the people in the middle, which is 80% of the people.
Yeah, that's fascinating. Okay, so you have 3 weeks to a primary, and if you are one of those top 2, what happens then as a decline to state candidate?
So at that point in time, it'll be a runoff with myself and the other person. And then we have until November to have the general election. And then once that happens, we have a whole new paradigm, or we don't. We have more of the same. And so we're letting people know that, look it, you have to understand, it is very similar to war. The big banks, the big money have equally invested on both sides and both parties. You are only, if you vote a Democrat or Republican, you're voting for a different wing of the exact same bird.
So 3 weeks, top two, then it's a runoff between you and the contender. Who's the front running alternative, except for you, leaving you aside, to Governor Newsom right now?
Well, people ask me that, like, who's your biggest challenge? And I'm gonna be frank. It's not really a person so much as it is a thing, and it's censorship.
Interesting. Okay. Wow, that's a cool answer.
Yeah.
So really, thank God for our founders, and thank God even for the basic structures in California, because it sounds as if when we use the power we have as Californians, a lot of things are possible. I mean, you and someone else could be the front runners. And then you and someone else are facing off in the general, and that can actually happen. And the censorship is exactly what keeps a lot of people from knowing about you and this other hypothetical candidate, perhaps. So now let's talk about have you enjoyed being on the campaign trail, I should ask?
I have loved it. I didn't know what to expect. I knew it could be exhausting, but it hasn't really been that exhausting. It's been more rejuvenating, and there's this incredible feedback loop. And I have to tell you, Naomi, it was actually the right that was embracing me initially the most. And then, of course, the people in the middle, and now the left are starting to come along as well. And the experience we have over and over again is people just saying, we don't care who it is. We just want solutions. We just want solutions. I'm like, great, I'm a solutionarian. I can help you with that.
Karen, I was telling people about you, and I said, her answers, I haven't heard them in years, but they so resonate with what people want to hear. When I asked you something about, well, how do you think the religious right will see the fact that you're an out lesbian? Or, I asked some other kind of old school label-y question. You said something like, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but you said something like, I'm a Californian. Will you give this audience the kind of answer you gave me when I asked a question like that?
Well, right. We're not playing on the same game board or by the same rules. And so I'm not playing by the old paradigm. This is a totally different campaign. This campaign actually supersedes politics and election cycle. This is about creating a cultural shift within California itself. I'm not a Democrat. I'm not a Republican. I'm a Californian. And all I ask is, are you a Californian? That's all I care about. And that's how I lead. And our 30-page contract with Californians that you mentioned earlier, we have written in such a way where we don't use the words that become lightning rods. We don't use the words that become political wedges or destroy the chance for a deeper conversation. We actually are literally talking about common sense, things that are so radical, they're old fashioned, and we're just coming back to just real basic, well-rounded solutions that are not part of the political dialogue that we're seeing today.
Fantastic. So now I want to turn to your contract with California, which I read in its entirety. And I recommend that everyone watching this, whether you live in California or not, go to electreinette.com and read it. It'll fascinate you if you're a Californian, but even if you don't live in California and you want to support Reinette, you should read it, because it's such an interesting template to solve a lot of problems, it seems, in other parts of the country. So let me highlight 2 or 3 planks that caught my attention. One of them is common sense education, and going back to some kinds of basics in public schools. And what really struck me are things like, well, limiting class size, that's been talked about before, but you also talk about limiting technology and lifting up, and I know millions of moms and dads will thank you and bless you for this, but lifting up these, as you put it, non-science-based COVID restrictions on kids, like masks and distancing and vaccine coercion. Will you just speak to the education plank and some of the issues I just raised?
Well, when we look at the history of public education, most people don't know. The Carnegies, the Rockefellers, they had 2 goals set for public education. The first was to remove any possibility of dissent from the individual, and the other one was to remove any originality from the child.
Right.
Where are we today? So what we're really doing is we're trying to bring common sense education back, where there's parental control, there's parental involvement, right? We know for a fact, for a multitude of reasons, being on the screen is not healthy for a variety of reasons. So what we want to do is we want to bring students back into the classroom, but have school options, so parents actually know their children better than anyone. It could be a pod, homeschool, public, private, whatever, but really bring back also the reskilling. So at the end, it's not about creating worker bees, but it's actually the end of their 12 years of education. It's about making better humans.
Right.
And so it's about teaching kids how to use their hands, how to make things, fix things, create things, right? Just, bringing back music, art. How about cursive writing? Right. And we have this saying that we think that, you can't go out there and become a painter, electrician, a mechanic. We need those things. Those are actually really lucrative jobs, right? Those are good careers to have. So bring that back, bring the trades back into the school, and a lot more mentorship. And this is also really key. As a person, again, who's been in the front lines trying to reweave the frayed fabric of community, I've learned from experience, this is not theoretical, that actually putting community gardens, produce gardens into schools, nursing homes, neighborhoods is the best way to supersede the division and the political rhetoric that does not serve anyone. And so I really love to see children actually involved in how their food is grown, how to rebuild soil, how to prepare food, what that food is medicine, right? What healthy living and eating really is. And I don't believe in mandates. I'm so done with mandates, but if I could mandate anything, I would mandate that every single nursing home and every elementary school had to back up and share the same playground.
Love it. How lovely.
And this is really important to understand. This is really important. There's several different philosophies that are at the basis of this campaign. And one of them is the understanding of a gentleman by the name of Dr. not Leonard Hardell, but Dr. Gabor Mate. He wrote In the Realm of Hungry Ghosts. He is very well known in Vancouver area for how the wounds, right, the addiction is many times it's actually caused in the womb of your mother. While just before you're even born, you're being impacted, right? You're being set up for addiction or mental illness. And he was at the Pioneers about 7-8 years ago at a plenary speech. And he talked about something he was seeing in North America. And this is really important to understand where we are, what's happening psychologically and even spiritually. Is he was talking about, they have in Vancouver an aquarium where a female beluga whale had been born in captivity. And then 12 years later, she was giving birth to her own baby beluga whale. And within a few days, that baby beluga's health began to fail. The mother beluga whale didn't know what to do. The handlers, the experts, no one knew what to do. So out of desperation, they brought in the last female beluga whale born in the wild. They put her into the aquarium and she began to teach the mother how to mother. And within days, the baby's health turned around.
My gosh, that's so heartbreaking.
It is, but what I'm seeing is I'm the latchkey generation. Even though I had older parents, so they were always home when I got home from school, most of my friends did not have that. I feel like the latchkey generation, was the first generation here on this continent to be born in the aquarium. Right. And subsequent generation, that door to the wild is shrinking. And it's absolutely paramount, because I've also spent time with the Athabascans and the Yupik Eskimos in Alaska. And I know that when they lose their customs, their ways, right, their belief systems and so on, it usually leads to loss of sense of self, addiction, alcoholism, depression. And we're seeing the same thing here. So the intergenerational connection is really, really important. And that could seem complicated to connect the generations again. But the truth of the matter is, Naomi, as you get some produce gardens out there in the town center, some blighted empty lots, some schoolyards and so on, the front yard, and the next thing you know, your community is coming back to life again.
That's beautiful. Well, you've done it. And a lot of candidates for office have not had the experience you've had of actually knitting a town together, actually helping a town boost its community and its economy. So let's go to some other planks in your platform. Again, super notable. You mentioned trade schools and people learning how to build things. And the other thing you mentioned is civics in your white paper. So what I'm noticing about many of the planks, which seem theoretically not that directly related to each other, is that what unites them all is self-sufficiency and self-reliance and resiliency, a word you like to use. So tell me about why you're interested in trade schools, and tell me also about, similarly, why you're interested in supporting family farms, replenishing the soil, doing other things in your platform that speak to people being self-reliant and self-sufficient.
Well, first and foremost, what we did to get this blueprint for California, this contract the Californians going, is we read myself and the team who asked me to run Newt Gingrich's Contract with Americans. Then we read rapper Ice Cube's Contract with Black Americans to kind of get a sense. And then we looked at California's biggest threats and challenges and said, okay, this is our opportunity to transmute them into our biggest opportunities and towards solutions. And so our whole economy, the blueprint for it is based upon restoration and healing. And if I had addressed this or brought this up 3-4 years ago, people would have no interest. Now they're absolutely hungry for it. People are exhausted. Exhausted. So, and the other thing that's really interesting is, as you know, over the generations, we have exported a lot of our manufacturing and our business and so on. And so over the generations, we've become consumers. And now what's dealt to us with COVID is that the global economy is not what it used to be. So we have to transmute ourselves from being consumers into becoming producers. Right. So the objective is to really boost up local and regional economies. First and foremost, we need food, right? That's the first place you start, is food. So what we looked at is the fact that we're losing our pollinators. We only have, a few years of pollinators left. We have 64 years left of topsoil to grow. So it's all about rebuilding the topsoil, rebuilding the pollinators, ensuring our legacy farms and ranches that have this incredible closed loop regenerative farming, component to it, that they are in place for generations to come. They are actually expanded, and this would be incentivized, by the way. We do have a second iteration to this contract with Californians that I can't wait to get up online because it's even better than what you read. But the objective is to incentivize a lot of the bigger agricultural farmers out there to actually start going more regenerative. And then, of course, the other thing is to just start rebuilding our mom and pop businesses and manufacturers by utilizing what's called the infrastructure bank. It's the I Bank of California.
Understand what that is. Please tell me more about that.
Well, originally, when I was looking at good models, because I always love to go out there and find the best models and try to implement them here, I looked at South Dakota, and they have a public bank, which has really allowed them to weather any kind of economic storms out there. And so I was saying earlier to my team, I was like, it'd be really great if we get a public bank going for California. And then I found out that we actually already have one. And It's completely underutilized. It's called the infrastructure bank, the iBank. And what I found out was that it has a ceiling of, and this is for infrastructure, right? Roads, levees, bridges, and so on, totally underutilized. It is more a slush fund for politicians. Most people don't even know it exists. And the cap on these infrastructure loans are like 25 million, 50 million. Well, not really enough for big jobs, not for the needs of California. But I realized that what we could do is we could actually completely reform it so that we lift the cap so it's much larger on these infrastructure jobs that we desperately need, which provides all these new jobs, right? Then what we do is we actually expand it to include the mom and pop businesses. So the businesses that have shuttered, the Main Street businesses, the small to large manufacturing businesses. Instead of us going to the big banks where they're actually charging 5 to 8% interest, what we do is we actually print the money ourselves at 0.25% of the interest. Mm-hmm. That means we've now saved hundreds of billions of dollars that are going in interest to somebody else, leaving the state. We keep the money in California. That increases what's called the economic multiplier effect, right? That dollar just circulates around and around each respective community. And we can, within no time, absolutely jumpstart California businesses of all sizes and incentivize the right kind of business that actually focuses on regenerative farming, right? Closing that loop, making sure that we're actually serving the 7th generation principle. So those businesses that can act and work in such a way that supports the 7th generation principle, we incentivize that as much as possible. And we hit the ground running.
Amazing. So thoughtful. That makes so much sense. I mean, the big banks are going to not want you to win, but a lot of other people will want you, will like that policy. Now let's talk briefly about energy. In California, energy is always such a pressing issue. And many people have said, I've read a lot of these bills in my job as reader of bills at Daily Cloud. California, has been very innovative with green energy, but your solutions are somewhat different. So tell us about how you're going to solve California's energy problems.
Well, first of all, we have been at the mercy of PG&E in Southern California Edison, and there's such huge monopolies. And what they're doing is they're taking a lot of our money and they're sending it to the shareholders rather than reinvesting it into the infrastructure of our lines and poles, which is causing extraordinary damage and death and the destruction of communities, as well as I have seen people crying in their yards because PG&E is coming in and cutting down all their trees, even when they're not getting permission.
Oh,
And they're terrorizing people. And so we need to really look at breaking up these monopolies and really decentralizing our energy and power grid. It's the safest thing we can do. Not only is it safe, because when PG&E does these massive blackouts, it's like all of Northern California and we're dead in the water. And so the best thing to do is decentralize. That allows us to actually reinvest our money back into our infrastructure rather than having it going to the shareholders. The other thing is too, and I haven't been able to get into it very much, is, I started my community work around oil and our oil addiction and wanting us to get off of it. I still think we need to get off of it to a certain extent because we're putting a lot of our same eggs in the same basket. But what has happened is over the years, I have worked in the green economy, and there's a huge, huge problem in the green economy. And we are doing something that it's called Javon's paradox. And Javon's paradox is you're making matters worse by trying to make them better. And the reason I've been seeing this is because what's happening, I was a senior director for what's called the CBPCA, California Building Performance Contractors Association. It was all around teaching and reskilling contractors around energy efficient green building science. Fabulous, but there's a problem. And it was a huge flaw. And I'm seeing it in a lot of green energy markets out there, is that there was no cradle to grave calculation. So with green building, right, and building science, they're saying, oh, it's really great. You'll save this much money once you have your single pane windows, yanked out and double, pane windows put in, and the insulation removed and new insulation and new this and new that. And like, great. But how much does it cost to rip that stuff out, to haul it off to some garbage dump? How much does it cost to actually mine the materials, produce the materials, water, energy, package, ship? How much does it cost? Well, they're not doing that calculation.
No, they leave it out.
And even with nuclear, I see people pushing nuclear. I'm like, look, I'm fine with nuclear. It works. When it works great. But you still have to do the cradle and grave calculation, which never is part of the topic or conversation. So I go back to, this is what I'm going to demand. We have to. We don't have a second chance. We don't have other chances. We have got to do the cradle to grave calculation on everything green. Otherwise, we're committing Javon's paradox. We're making matters worse. Looks good on paper, doesn't work in the real world.
I wish we could apply some of this to my hometown. There's a gigantic solar farm that is being rammed through, again, this top-down mechanism somehow, that the governor says, we're just demanding you do this over the heads of city council. And it's going to turn hundreds of acres of productive farmland into a solar wasteland after 15 years, when these things give out and there's the need to dispose of them. And we need food. So yes.
And we need food. And I have to tell you, this has been a 180 for me. I mean, I was pro, and I'm not anti-solar. I'm not anti anything. I just want to see the numbers. That's it.
Fair enoug. So, so you're saying you want a mixed portfolio for California, is that correct?
Yes, and this is the other thing. This is a big one for me, right? So I was fighting against oil, right? That's my whole organization. That's my whole start in my movement in my community. But what I've come to understand, it's a multi-pronged approach, and one of them is that we can go out there and we can export the environmental damage like we do when we go and pump in other nations that have no environmental regulation whatsoever. And we eviscerate cultures and governments and people and their environment. And then we have to transport it all this way. Or for now, we're very particular where we pump. But what we do is we pump with the highest environmental regulation we can possibly have, set the gold standard, and we are better than a lot of other nations, while simultaneously creating an incredible renaissance around research and development. and getting onto market what I would consider free energy. I know that seems pie in the sky, but it's not. We know that there have been devices that have been created, that have been purchased and have been shelved for generations. It is actually time that we start creating this incredible renaissance around energy production and getting it out onto the market while simultaneously using the oil that we have, keeping the highest environmental standards. And I'm key to say, I'm not okay with us going and drilling on indigenous lands without the indigenous permission and consent, and also making sure that they get paid for that. I'm also very key to say that I'm also very protective of certain ocean platforms, Arctic, certain areas that are more environmentally susceptible. So it's not just as free for all, but it is a multi-pronged approach with the idea of decentralizing the power grids, utilizing oil wisely, oil production wisely, while we're going out there and creating this incredible shoot for the moon, challenging Californians, challenging Americans to say, can we not do better than this? How long have we been doing this now? We can't do better than this. And going out there and creating an incredible renaissance around oil and, around energy production.
A lot of people will think that sounds really refreshingly innovative. It's, when we talk about energy or any of these issues, really, it's so striking that the solutions that are out there are either all oil or all, gigantic socialist Green New Deal. And there's so little room for a kind of discussion like this, which is taking the best of all worlds. One might say. Is your partner full on? Is she ready to be first lady, or what would it
be? She'd be a phenomenal first lady, and this campaign would not happen without her. It would be impossible. So she's full on, and she understands what's at stake. She realizes what's at stake, and we're willing to do whatever it takes.
What's her profession, please, or what's her
She's
field?
A therapist, family therapist, and she's been seeing firsthand what the impacts of the last 2 years have had on people and teenagers firsthand. It's been really awful. So we've been watching it. Yeah. So at this point in time, we have a very short runway, and the main thing is to supersede the all of this incredible censorship. I was taken off of Instagram. My campaign website or page was off of Instagram in January. Our hashtags don't work. People can't post. So the best thing is just to tell everyone to go to Reinette.com, sign up on the newsletter, share. I'm on Instagram. I'm now Reinette Senum 2.0, back up again. And supersede the censorship, because obviously we must be over the target because they keep trying to silence this campaign.
They must think you have a real chance, Reinette, if they're censoring you. That's pretty impressive.
Yeah, no, we're heavily censored. And so whether you're outside or inside of California, it's paramount to get the word out. Share our posts. Share, the electreinette.com website. And yes, of course, we do need money. We are doing this on just pennies compared to most people. We're highly determined, and we're getting a lot done with very little, but we still need, especially in this next 3 weeks, we've got to bump up our game significantly. And Reinette Senum has to become a household name in order for us to do this. And we're telling people, this is not about waiting for the general election. You've got to jump in right now. We know you're in the middle. We know you're there. You've got to vote for the primary. If not, you're going to have the two extremes make and determine the next 4 years. And understand that while this may have seemed impossible to be a declined estate candidate, no, firsthand experience, Californians are absolutely hungry for this. And we are all about solutions, and that's what we're putting forward.
And lastly, since so many of the hurdles are people finding out that it's primary day, knowing where to vote on primary day, what practical guidance can you give them about how they don't miss it and how they find their voting location?
Well, no, it's open ballot, basically, so you can vote for anybody. It does not matter party affiliation, but understand that come May 9th, the ballots are going out to every single voter, which is a little bit it's not very good for us, because a lot of people are going to be actually, throwing their ballot back into the mail and sending it. And that just gives the powers that be, if they so choose, time to mess with the ballots. So what we really recommend is once you get to that ballot, make sure you have it. They're going out on May 9th. If you don't, start working and finding out what happened to your ballot. Do not mail it in. Go into your polling place the day of election and drop it in.
What is the day of election for your primary?
That is June 7th.
June 7th is the big day. And what if people get to June 7th and they don't have their mailed ballot for some reason? Can they vote in the polling place?
They can, but I would suggest getting on it before then. That gives you a little bit more time yourself to clean up the mess. And I have had people say to me, Reinette, what if the election is rigged? Why bother voting? And I've been telling folks, like, look at you guys, what we are proposing here supersedes politics in this election. This is about a cultural shift within the state of California, and I actually do believe we're really in the running. And so now is the time, if you believe in your future, and you have to believe right now, this is the moment. This is not the time to do nothing. This is the time to actually get engaged, and everyone to get engaged and to vote like your lives depend upon it, because they do.
Okay, fantastic. Everyone, if you like what you heard, whether you're inside or outside the state of California, these are like where California leads the nation, right? It's the tip of the spear. So if you want to support a leader in California, whether you live in California or not, you can go to electreinette.com and make a donation. And if you live in the state of California, do not mail in your vote. I'm just repeating what Reinette said, but I agree with her. Go in person, everybody, all the time, every state, and fill out that ballot and make it happen. Whoever you support, it's not just about you; it's about the future, as Ms. Senum says. Thank you so much, and we wish you every success.
Thank you, Naomi. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Of Daily Clout, and I am asking you to please, if you like the video you just saw, support us, become a member, donate. You can send checks to P.O. Box 24, Millerton, New York, 12546, or go to Daily Clout, DAILYCLOUT, become a member or donate. Thank you so much for your support. Every penny goes for paying our hardworking staff, paying hosting costs, and paying our lawyers who have been leading the fight to keep you safe and free, to keep the Constitution safe and to keep you free. Thank you so much.